Hey everyone, this is your host, Andrew Holland. Thank you so much for listening to the Andrew Holland podcast each and every week, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. As an entrepreneur who's been through a lot of highs and a lot of lows, I started this podcast to be a source of weekly motivation, inspiration, and support for all of us who are working to achieve something meaningful. And as importantly, so that none of us ever have to feel alone or isolated while we're doing so. Together, we explore the stories of successful people, we get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things. We discuss practical and fascinating business models and strategies, and we dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. So please, help me grow our group and subscribe to the show on your favorite audio platform. Subscribe to, watch, and thumbs up our episodes on our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Follow and interact with me on Twitter and Threads. My handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. That's probably my favorite part of the whole podcast is the interaction I get with our guests and with you as our listeners. Lastly, if you enjoy the show and you want to support what we're working to accomplish, please share our show with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues at work. This show is nothing without you and your support, and I'm so incredibly thankful for each and every one of you listening, watching, and sharing the podcast every single week. Now it's time to get our motivation, inspiration, and support for this week and jump into today's episode. In today's episode, James Cromwell, an entrepreneur who has found a tremendous amount of success having individuals and large corporations pay him for his voice as a voiceover recorder, tells us all about how he established a successful foundation in what we call the gig economy. We talk about how he got started. We talk about the challenges that are presented to him when you are in an industry that has a very low barrier to entry and how you can be successful. And we talk about if you are someone who just isn't sure what action to take or what step to take to become your own entrepreneur or to work for yourself, how this might be a perfect opportunity for you. I really enjoyed the insight that James shared with us, and I think you as our audience will too.
While Andrew Holland is a CPA, a real estate broker, and involved in multiple businesses, including some investment companies, the Andrew Holland podcast is for informational purposes only. All of Andrew's views and those of his guests are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of any of the businesses or companies Andrew or his guests are affiliated with. You should not treat any advice, conversation, business recommendation, investment recommendation, or anything of the like as a specific inducement to make a specific business decision, take a specific action, make a particular investment, or follow a specific business or investment strategy. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show.
James, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me.
So you and I met through your profession. You have an incredible voice, as our listeners will find out. And one of the things that most excited me when we talked about having you on the podcast is a lot of people want to participate and be successful, sustainably so, in what we call the gig economy.
Yep.
And you have done exactly that. And so I want to get into everything that you do. You've worked for some huge corporations. I want to talk about all the skills and talents that you do, almost all remotely, correct?
Yeah, all remotely. Yep.
And of course, I've seen some of the advertisements that you've done, voiceovers for McDonald's, which I love that ad. And then there were some other ones. So if you can't name who you work for, we certainly keep everything confidential we need to. But
Sure.
I know you've worked for some large organizations, so I'd love to hear some of the biggest that you've worked for to the extent that you can share. But before we get into all of that, all of my listeners always want to know, how did you get to where you are? What made you so entrepreneurial? Did you know you were an entrepreneur? How did you get to where you are? Did you work for another organization? What gave you the momentum to kind of take that risk and jump off the diving board, if you will, into working for yourself and pursuing your passion? So take us back. Where did you grow up? Were your parents entrepreneurial? Tell us about your childhood and bring us to today.
Sure. Okay. I mean, that's a big, all-encompassing question for sure.
Yes, it is.
But so I'm from Canada. I'm from Ontario, kind of near Niagara Falls, Toronto area. And
Okay.
born and raised here. My parents, my father was a preacher, my mother's a school teacher. So there wasn't a lot of entrepreneurial stuff going on there for quite some time when I was growing up. But somehow the spark, I think, was already kind of in me for some reason, which got me into a lot of trouble in elementary school. There was it was weird because I wanted to start my own library at one point, thinking that I could like sell my books out for rent and then have them come back to, like, I don't know. I thought libraries were for profit. And I was going down that road for some, like, I brought all my books
You're
to
trying to be
school.
the
Yeah.
you're trying to be the Jeff Bezos, right? I mean,
Essentially, yeah, like Jeff Bezos of the playground. I went for it.
exactly.
And yeah, I was told pretty quickly I couldn't do that because we had a library and I shouldn't be sort of like bringing all this stuff to school. And I made cards and everything, like membership cards. Anyways, there was, and then, yeah, there's a few little things like that where I just kind of started trying to kind of create little businesses. Landscaping was another one where my grandfather actually was the one who said, "Hey, if you're cutting lawns anyways, why don't you put a sign out?" Friend of mine and I started a car detailing thing for a while. Just all these little odd jobs just always kind of kept popping up because I like making some money when I can here and there. And it always felt kind of like it's not that hard to just kind of put your name out there and see who wants to kind of to work with you. Right. So,
Yeah, and
um,
you had that entrepreneurial bug. Clearly, it's a genetic thing for you.
I suppose so. I don't know. My dad ended up opening up a bookstore after he was done being a preacher. So there's something there. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's definitely a lot of it kind of just around me. But yeah, that was it kind of when I was younger. And then I kind of got into the corporate world. I, just was, I guess you can call a wage slave for, just a while where I, would only
Yeah,
really be selling my time. And it's not,
and what do you do in the corporate world?
yeah. So I started just as a customer service representative. And then I kind of worked my way through to being a retention specialist and then something called a real time management analyst. And so I just kind
Okay.
of went through kind of those kind of jobs. And that's when Fiverr happened. So I didn't really think much of it. I don't know if do you want me to kind of just get straight into it or.
Yeah, yeah. So Fiverr, for those of you who are listening and aren't sure what that is, Fiverr is basically excellent idea. And I had used something similar to this prior to Fiverr becoming a hit called Guru.com,
Yeah.
probably 20 years ago. Are you familiar with Guru.com?
Yeah. Yeah. I know the name, but I haven't really used the site that much.
Yeah, so when I was trying to do, just like you, when I was a kid, did all these little silly entrepreneur things, and I tried to sell ad space on a website, and I needed someone to build it, so I went to Guru.com. Well, Fiverr came out, as you indicated, and it really allows anybody to do anything that they want if they market themselves and they have a skill set that they want people to pay their services for. So, tell us about how you found Fiverr and your journey on Fiverr.
I'm not sure exactly how I found it. I think the name kind of organically started getting out there more and more. There was a lot of kind of like
Sure.
early on with Fiverr, obviously the name itself indicates that everything costs $5, which I think was their original business plan. Was every you went on the site, you bought something for $5, you got it. And there was somebody called Voiceover Pete who was a kind of he created a lot of memes back in the Fortnite days in about 2017. And yeah, there was some different stuff where Fiverr the name kept kind of coming up, right? Oh, Fiverr.com, what's that? And when I was looking at it, I didn't even actually know if I could do voiceover. I'd never done that before. I'd worked on the phones a lot, and a lot of people, and even at hospitality, I did. I worked at a hotel for a while, and people always tell me, you should do radio, right? Something people say, and eventually I was like, well, I wonder if I could just start trying to do some voice acting stuff. I did drama in high school. I was in plays and stuff like that. And I've always liked to, be on video and talk. And so it's like, what, let's just start trying to do some character voices and just kind of see what works. And I looked around online and saw that there was some sort of free options where you can, people are like looking for voices and you just submit your stuff and it's all free. You're not
Hmm.
getting paid or anything like that. But I thought, oh, just to get some practice, I'll try some of that. Nothing really, nothing really went anywhere. It didn't really go anywhere. It didn't really, I didn't get a lot of traction there until I went on Fiverr and I was like, oh, you can just set up like as many gigs, as you want. At the time, I think it was like 5 gigs or something.
Hmm.
And those gigs can be, like you said, almost anything, right? So I didn't know it would work, so I put on voiceover I put on that I would create YouTube thumbnails. I put on that I would teach people how to play a certain video game I was pretty good at, and I put on that I would create D&D characters for people and stuff like that. And so, like, who knew, right? Who knew what would work, what wouldn't work? This was totally just out of the blue. And
Yeah.
for a long time, like almost a year, nothing really. Like just no, nothing going on. And kind of out of nowhere, I would just start getting like a little bit here and there. So somebody would message and they, for like $5, almost nothing, I would do like 250 words of voiceover script. And my quality was terrible. I didn't know what I was doing. My voice was probably kind of okay, but like my microphone was bad. I didn't have a professional studio. I didn't have sound treatment. And some of my first clients would tell me like, "Hey, like, can you fix this up? Can you clean it up?" And I'd listen to it back and think, "Oh, that sounds pretty good." Right? Like I didn't know. And so
Yeah, you're learning, right?
exactly. I was just learning on the fly, going, okay, yeah, I guess that does sound kind of echoey. What can I do? Right. And it got to the point where, I was taking moving blankets and throwing them over my head at my desk, where the moving blankets would sit on the back of my desk chair and go over my monitors. And I'd be creating like a little tent with a moving blanket just to get like a better audio quality. And
To absorb the sound and no echoes. I love that.
it helped. It worked, right? It sounded good enough that it was able to start, people liked it. And the more traction just would create even more impressions on the website. And then all of a sudden, because my prices were set so incredibly low, my voice is very hoarse today. I apologize. I was selling for so low that people just started flooding in. And it was, some great clients, some not so great clients, because when your price is set that low, that's kind of what ends up happening.
Yeah.
But either way, a client is a client, and a lot of all the reviews were positive. So it just started gaining this sort of snowball traction where I had to keep putting the prices up because there were just too much new work coming in that I couldn't actually keep up with. Around that time, COVID happened. I lost my other job because of COVID stuff. I think, don't really know.
What industry was yeah, what industry was that in?
The tech industry.
Okay, it was the tech
Yeah,
industry.
yeah.
Okay.
And so it was just like, hey, this is a huge opportunity. Fiverr was just starting to take off. I guess I can say, like, money wise, it was starting to get to the exact same point that my other job was as far as like monthly
Wow.
income.
Mhm.
So, and it was growing exponentially every month at that time, where like within the span of, I think, about 4 months, it went from being nothing to being on par with my monthly salary. Um, yeah, yeah. So
That is incredible.
yeah,
And you
and
didn't do any marketing on Fiverr or anything of that nature. It was simply a nature or a product of the fact that your prices were low and your quality for what someone was paying for was fantastic.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And at that time, it was before I was even into any of like the programs. So on Fiverr, once you're on there for a while, you're established, they'll start bringing you into different programs, giving you the ability to promote on the website, which is like a paid ad promotion type thing. But at that time, no, it was just straight up, just impressions from the success. Essentially, and a lot of this gets into the weeds of how their algorithm works because every website's
Yeah.
different. But I do think just the amount of sort of like completed orders being rated highly is something that's going to drive up your impressions, for
Yeah,
any
certainly.
kind of any sales you're making on that kind of a platform. So regardless of what people want to get into, just getting sort of a ball rolling there with just a low price with a high quality can be a good way to kind of just jumpstart it.
So, did you go to college?
Yeah, I went to community college for business.
Okay. And then after you graduated there, you went kind of the path that everybody
Yeah.
does and you went to work in the corporate world. Did you know this wasn't what you wanted to do long term or what ultimately because a lot of people work in the corporate world and they're miserable, but they never take that step and we'll talk about all the reasons and advice that
Mhm.
you would give to someone finds himself in the situation, but they never take that step to actually bet on themselves. What prompted you to look elsewhere? Like, what prompted you to say, hey, I've been told by a lot of people that I've got a voice that could be a quality voice, that could be a great radio voice. How can I monetize that?
Yeah. I would say, honestly, in my case, it was something that was lucky enough to be something that was like low impact to start. which there are a lot of things you can do to create sort of this low impact to start business, which is something I've heard about online a few times now. But there's some businesses where there's no escaping it. Like if you want to open a bakery, right? What are you going to
Yep.
do, right? You're going to go get a brick and mortar store. You're going to pay a lot of money, get a loan, whatever it is you're going to do, and you're in, right? And now you're either
Yeah.
going to sink or swim. But there's a lot of online businesses where you don't need to make that giant investment to start. For me, to find out whether or not this was right was just a matter of putting myself out there and just seeing whether or not people were interested. And literally, I had no idea that anybody would be interested, which definitely came with quite a lot of imposter syndrome for the first couple years of doing it. As it started
Yeah.
getting traction and being successful, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, man. Like if I get on like a directed call with something, like I got to go look up terminology. What's a pickup? What's a, what's punch and roll? What's any of this stuff, right? Like as far as the voiceover world, right? Like, if I
Yeah.
work with somebody who is used to working with an audio engineer in a studio and like all these things, maybe they're going to be a little bit off put with dealing with somebody who's never been in that space, never really understood that world, right? So the
Yeah.
freelance world and the other sort of more legitimized, world of voiceover, it's very different thing. So I guess I got a little off track there, but the main point is there are businesses where you can kind of get in without really having a lot of overhead and really having to take a lot of risks. And in my case, there was no real risk, right? Because at the beginning, I used equipment I already had. I used free audio software online at the time. I didn't have any, extra money put into my studio or anything like that. And then over time, as it started working, that's when the investment came in, right? Where it went, okay, now I've got the income already from it. I can justify this easily, right? Like I can just see like the ROI is clear. Like if I drop $1,000 on building a sound booth, if I, buy, $800 of audio equipment, that's going to be taken care of in, sales over the course of a week and a half, 2 weeks, right? Like, great. Like, let's just do that. So
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
everything you're talking about is the same thing, regardless of the industry, that every entrepreneur has to go through. Proof of concept. Okay. How can I put something together and see if this business idea has some legs? And if it doesn't, you move on to the next one. But what I think is important and what I think is so inspirational in terms of what you did, and I think a lot of people don't recognize this, is there are a million opportunities for anybody anywhere in any part of the country if you have a computer and access to the internet, which I
Hmm.
recognize a lot of people don't have that. But if you want to become an entrepreneur or find a source of income that is entirely dependent on your input versus, as you described it earlier, being a wage slave, anybody can do it, but they have to have a commitment to consistency.
Hmm.
And I imagine for you, you talked about how did you try on a different platform before Fiverr and you put
No.
some stuff out there and nothing
No,
was
no, this
taking?
was
Okay,
like
so it was
no,
just Fiverr.
there was a subreddit for like free audio work. And
Oh,
as
okay.
as sort of like a let's figure out how this works thing, like before I was even really
Sure.
on Fiverr, I was checking that out. But no, it really Fiverr was the main one. And then there's a feeling of chicken and the egg or eggs in one basket kind of fear, right? Like, okay, all of
Yeah.
my income basically it's from one source, right? Like, how can I get on other platforms? Like, what can I do to kind of spread this out? That's still a work in progress. Fiverr was so successful that it's really hard to kind of like break away from that and find other things to do. So there's lots of little like things to be aware of with the sort of freelance gig economy stuff. Just because you're successful
Yeah.
on one platform doesn't mean it's going to be easy to pull that success to a different platform as well. So yeah, it gets a little dicey there.
Well, and baby steps, first
Yeah.
you became successful on one platform and now you're thinking about diversification. Again, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter what industry you're in, what business you're in, all of those are things that you need to or will eventually hit and start thinking about it. What did the people in your life think about this? You said you picked up your daughter just before us getting together. Are you married? Did your wife say you're crazy? Tell me a little bit about all the people around you and when you ultimately did
Hmm.
decide to quit your corporate job, how did that go over?
Yeah. So first off, the consistency thing I think was a really great point. I've definitely seen other people who are in this sort of same space. And they'll go to message boards and talk about how like, oh, I've got this, I've got that going on. Should I cancel this order? What should I do with it? And that's just never been an option for me. Like when I thought about this as something where people are buying my services, you just deliver, right? And like as you move forward in it, you get a chance to have a little bit more flexibility. Once you are more established, you can tell people like, hey, I need the weekend. This is what's going on. I can deliver by Monday, right? And you can feel more comfortable in doing that. But in the early
Communicate.
days, yeah, in the early days of this, my son was being born and I was like, hey, as soon as this is good, I'm going to pop back to the house and do a quick voiceover. I'm going to be right back. Like my wife's on board with all of this, right? Like she's never been difficult about it. She's always been supportive with it. But yeah, like as far as like we've just been celebrating it from the beginning to here, right? Because there was moments where, a job would come in for $30, let's say, and we're both like, what? We're getting $30 for me just going and talking into a microphone? This is incredible, right? And then, the next day, oh, I've got two more messages, right? Like 2 messages. Are you kidding me? And I remember those moments really fondly. But yeah, moving forward to now, yeah, I forget what the original question was. I went back to the consistency thing.
Well, no, I think so many things that you just said are really important notes for all entrepreneurs. And the reason I started this podcast and I talk about this a lot is because anybody, it doesn't matter what someone's doing, whether they open up a bakery and that's a pretty capital intensive, or whether they start something like what you're talking about and what you did that's relatively low risk. There is still a level of commitment, as you talked about, and investment mentally that you have to make, and that will result in highs and lows. And
Hmm.
everything you just talked about, when you're starting and you're doing this, I'm doing this for $5. I'm
Yeah.
learning all this stuff. It's taking me an hour to do this one voiceover, and I
Yeah.
sent it to
Yeah.
the client and they're not happy, and I'm getting $5. And so everybody goes through that. And I
Hmm.
think for me, what was so important being an entrepreneur very early on, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts. I started a garbage company at 22 or 23 with one of my business partners, Joe. Very capital intensive. I'm a CPA by trade, knew nothing about the industry, had no idea what I was getting into. Just we were completely naive and foolish. But and so you go through a lot of dark times.
Hmm.
You go through a lot of good times and you have to enjoy them. But oftentimes you can feel very alone. But the
Absolutely.
reality is, anybody working to do what you and I are doing is going through the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, on a platform like Fiverr, they actually have something called like a success coach who eventually will start like meeting with you. And I remember like when that first started happening, it felt so incredible because it's like I finally have somebody who not only like is invested in me doing well because it looks good on them, but like also like they know the ins and outs of this platform better than I can. So like they can kind of give me pointers. The one thing is because you're
That's a
so yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, keep going.
When you're so desperate for that sort of connection with anybody else who knows about anything that you're doing, because everybody in your life is just like, oh, cool, voiceover. So you do like characters and stuff? I'm like, yeah, sort of. I don't know. But when you start meeting with them, I was so desperate for that sort of connection that like I took their sort of what they gave me too literally and I ran with it so hard that I ended up hurting my own business a little bit and it took me a while to like recover from it. So like I think what you're saying is absolutely true and like because it is like such a need for entrepreneurs to have somebody else who actually knows what they're dealing with, having a mentor is incredibly useful. Having somebody who else has like kind of gone through it is awesome. But staying true to yourself and realizing that like your situation is unique regardless and anybody else's advice is just that, it can just be advice, but they don't know exactly what's going on with what you're doing, and at the end of the day like your choices need to be your choices and they have to be right for your business. So there's no
That
shortcuts,
isn't
right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point because I've gone through so many of those things. When you are inexperienced and you're new at something, you're desperately looking to grasp on to someone that can help you, especially when it's hard, as hard as
Hmm.
it is in the early days, whether it's financially, well, it's going to be financial, and whether it's just emotionally,
Hmm.
primarily emotionally. And so, to your point, I've been in that same situation where you ask for advice and you take every single word as the absolute gospel truth and
Hmm.
you apply it without saying, okay, you got to put it in the context. You got to conform it around your business, what you're trying to accomplish. And so my philosophy is take advice from everybody, use the advice that you find most impactful and helpful for you and tailor it to what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. And be careful with when you're applying these different pieces of advice, if you can be scientific about it, that's the absolute best thing. Because if you take like a big bunch of changes and just throw them at your business and you won't even know what worked, right? So I think that
Yeah.
was one of the biggest problems that I had at the time is just like let's just throw everything at it. And then it's like, well, that didn't work. Now, did part of it work? Right? Like, I don't know. So you have to be slow and methodical and be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like with an experiment, right? You change too many variables, you're not going to know what to attribute the resulting change to. You got to do it piece by piece. Now, tell me about the time. And I think you hit a really important point. And we've talked about this a lot on our podcast business partners, but relationships. When you are in a relationship, if you have a spouse that is incredibly supportive, that's going to mean the world versus the opposite. And so for you to have your wife who was so supportive, it was probably a lot easier for you. And tell me about that time when you said, "Okay, we're there. I want to quit my job. Honey, are you on board with this?" Tell me what you guys went through there cuz that's still incredibly scary, I have to imagine.
Yeah. So, um, luckily for me, I didn't have to pull the trigger on that because COVID stuff, it happened to me. So
You said that. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I didn't have to make that difficult choice. That would have been tough for sure. Especially like the nature of moving from a salary to a, I can make as much as I can, but also, hills and valleys, good times and bad.
Yeah.
It's a very different situation. One that if you haven't been in it before it's it just takes a lot of getting used to. And man, in those moments where nothing has kind of come in, everything's kind of quiet, right? Like even if it's for a day, if you have a day a day that you already know should be slow, right, where you just crushed out tons and like everything's looking good, and it's Sunday afternoon and there's just no emails, nothing has come in, right? All of a sudden you get this feeling like, oh cool, I'm never going to work again, right? Like it's completely irrational, it doesn't make any sense. And to her support, right, like she knows that I think that way every time something like that happens. And so now I'll just jokingly tell her, hey, I feel terrible about this right now, and she'll say, I know. And then we just move on, right?
I love that you have that open line of communication because I think that's the other thing that people are afraid to do is just be honest with how they're feeling as an entrepreneur. And that can be one of the most detrimental uh, things for an entrepreneur if you don't first off face that, okay, this is happening and I'm feeling terrible right now. And then you hold it in or you don't have someone to communicate it to, like you just described.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can find like an outlet for yourself that is like very, very encompassing that you can get away from this stuff with. For myself, I got super into rock climbing, and it
Mm,
I can't think about anything else when I'm climbing, right? Like just it just doesn't work. You're just so in
yeah.
that world just then that like there's nothing getting through, right? So um that can be really good if you can find something like that. But yeah, having people that you can actually communicate with and who can celebrate your wins with you, and kind of come to your level, and kind of pull you out of it a little bit when you're feeling like things that don't even make sense sometimes, right? Like how are we
Yeah.
ever going to business again? Well, because you always do, right? But yeah, it's super super helpful, and that doesn't have to be your spouse, could be a best friend, whatever.
Yeah.
Business
Yeah, that's a
partner.
great point. I think the other thing that you talked about is having an outlet. I talked to a lot of incredibly successful entrepreneurs, and every single one of them voiced almost exactly what you just voiced in terms of you need to find an outlet outside of your business. For you, it's rock climbing. For other people, it's some type of hobby that requires 100% of your mind capacity, so you can take it off of the business, let your mind relax in that regard, focus there, and when you come back, you can be refreshed. You're going to think more clearly. I think that is a common theme through all entrepreneurs without question.
Hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
So, can anybody do what you've done, James?
Yeah, you just have to leverage some kind of a skill. There's so many different things you could be doing. I think the thing that like really flabbergasted me with it is just like because of the worldwide nature of it. And I mean, I only do English voiceover. I'm monolingual. I don't have any other languages that I can speak. So
Hmm.
you might think the only voiceover being bought would be from English speaking countries, Canada, US, UK, Australia, but there's around the world need for this service. And so getting outside of that into something that's not so language based, if you're creating something, like if you're creating art, if you're um, editing video, if you're helping people with their resumes, if you're there's so many different things that you could have a skill in, that you're talented in. And the cool thing is you can start trying to leverage it at such a low barrier to entry. You could basically get yourself a profile and put that service up within an evening, right? Just from do some keyword research, figure out what you need to have in your profile, film yourself a little video of you explaining what it is you want to sell, whatever it is you want to do, right? To kind of get yourself out there. I mean, and it doesn't even have to be through a platform like Fiverr or Upwork or Guru or any of these sites. You can do it like on Twitter, whatever. Like just start
Yeah.
offering, right? Throw it out there. Hey, this is something I do, and just show it, right? Make sure you show it, so people can see your work and see like, okay, that's something I actually want to buy. And then, yeah, what's amazing to me is like how much money there is in the world to capture is incredible. Once you get out of the I sell my time for money thing, it's
Yeah.
so crazy to me. And finding people where they're at is like it's really crazy because you can like be talking to like somebody who's working for some giant corporation. I won't put a name in there right now, but like they have a budget and it might seem completely crazy to you, but they're looking to spend that budget. And like you just have
Yeah.
to be okay with capturing it because they want to buy your service. And it is so difficult to get over that hump, especially when you feel like, it's not worth that, right? But you just have to figure that out and go like, okay, that's a thing we're doing now.
Well, I love that I've talked to, again, so many entrepreneurs, and you aptly put it, imposter syndrome. Every single successful entrepreneur, I believe, goes through some form of imposter syndrome because you don't believe it when it's happening. You don't, for some reason, and I don't know why this is. I think there's some benefit to this, but there's also certainly a disadvantage. But we don't believe at some point during the journey that someone would value us or our services or our goods, depending on what they're valuing it. And we're perplexed. Like, why would someone pay me to do this? And until you realize that every single business transaction is merely two humans, the core of any transaction interacting, where one wants your good or service and the other one is providing it. And that's the beauty of the free market system, that yes, you have value. You can provide a service that to you may seem completely mind boggling, but to this person, it's something they need. You do an excellent job and they're willing to pay you for it.
Yeah.
And I love it's sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around that,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
especially when you're talking about, as you said at the beginning, you're just recording your voice for people.
Hmm.
But we've heard good audio, we've heard bad audio. Obviously your voice, you've perfected your voice, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Did you have to
Sure.
work on voice lessons, or do you just naturally have this talent? And this is all in the spirit of anybody listening right now who's stuck in a corporate job and they don't know how to propel themselves forward, stop becoming a wage slave, and do something for themselves. What can they do? You're a perfect example of someone that did that. Obviously, as you indicated, the company let you go, so you were kind of forced into it. Certainly a blessing in disguise.
Hmm.
But for a lot of people, they need help or some type of advice that gives them some comfort. Nobody can force you to do anything, and no one's going to actually take the action, but they need something from someone such as yourself that's done it before, so that they can have the confidence that try it and you will be successful. I'm a big believer. If you bet on yourself, you're going to fail. Everybody
Hmm.
fails. You should pray for failure, but you're never going to get success if you don't try something.
Absolutely. And I
So,
mean, the only thing worse than failing would be at the end of the day going like, I never tried, right? Like I just having that in the back of your head of just knowing like, hey, I had all those years to try this thing and it never happened. If it all fell
yeah.
apart tomorrow and I never got another voiceover job because AI voice just got that good and I'm just never going to work again, cool. Then I go back to the corporate world, I do something else and, eventually probably start trying to run another business, right? We actually, my wife and I have started a couple other little things on the side that we're trying to do now, right? That are, just adjacent small businesses that are, trying to create different streams of income. So like this sort of thing is always going to be in you. But yeah, no, like let's get back to the crux of that. The crux of your question was essentially just how people should think about whether or not they should give it a shot.
Well, two things. Number one, for you, how did you know voiceover was the place to go? Because that's people's biggest problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. Everybody says, okay, I want to start a business, but what should I start? And
Yeah,
people just kind of stop there.
here's the crazy thing. I thought it was fun, right? I thought it was fun to go try
That's
to do some
fantastic.
silly voices on the internet. And then, when people started buying it, wow, that's really cool. Maybe I should do more of that. And I would be lying if I said that it's always fun now, because it's not, right? Like sometimes it's not fun. You have your times that are really great and really fun. Like if it just depending, right? Like maybe I've got something where somebody wants me to do some voice acting and it actually is like a story, a character, something like that. Sometimes I'm doing 20,000 words of a technical manual for people to learn how to run a train and the inside and out of all the electrical systems of a certain train system, right?
That doesn't sound very fun.
No, it's not. But you get paid, right? So, like I started because it was fun, and that's a really good place to start, right? If you have fun doing something and you have the ability to monetize it, cool. And then, I mean, YouTube exists. So that means if you have fun doing anything, there's an ability to monetize it through short form or long form content, right? So, um, yeah, essentially, I mean, that's like the most cliche thing that people used to always say, right? Like, turn your hobby into your job or like, whatever. But if you can, like, it doesn't hurt to try, right?
Yeah. Well, and the thing with what you've done and what you've described is it's so low risk. Like, what's there to
Hmm.
be afraid of? There's really nothing to be afraid of, unless if you truly don't believe in yourself or your ability to create any type of value that someone is willing to pay for. And I think that is really the crux of a lot of people's root uh, cause of the problem or fear is they don't actually believe, for whatever reason, that they have the capability or have a good or service that someone is willing to pay
Yeah.
for. And I believe that's utterly false, and everybody does.
And I think I overlook that a lot in myself, because if I have somebody out of the blue, right? Could be anybody in the world, could be anybody from any country in the world, message me right now and say, "Hey, I need you to do, a voice for this. It's for this product." And we also have like all these words that are hard to pronounce. And we have like, it might be tough, but I'm going to give it my best shot and send it back to them. I'm not going to cancel it and go, "I don't know how to do that." I've had so many projects where I've looked at it and went, I have no clue if they're going to like this. Here you go. Right. Worst case scenario, they come back with notes and you have to redo it. Right. So, um, I guess you're right. And I kind of forget that sometimes. This is going to sound really shitty, but that's fine. I like myself a lot. Right. Like I really, really like myself in general. Right. So I generally think that I have value, and that and if you don't start from there, right? If you don't come from a headspace of loving yourself, how could you ever want to put yourself out there, right? So, mental health probably has a pretty good role in entrepreneurship right there. Because, and I mean, look at somebody like all these people who are incredibly successful. Some of them are delusionally, have the delusional confidence in themselves, right? To the point of
Yes,
taking
very.
insane amounts of risk, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So there you go. Do you
I,
have like a giant, delusional feeling of self confidence? Because if you do, then you're probably already being an entrepreneur, right? So, so I don't have to
yeah.
tell you to do it.
I think you hit on something, James, that's really important. And I've never had an entrepreneur quite describe it the way you just did, but it's so crucial. You cannot be successful if you don't love yourself enough to believe that other people will value a good or service that you provide.
Hmm.
And you linked it to mental health, and I don't think anybody disagrees. In the global economy, we certainly have a mental health crisis with I would say my generation and the generations below me, I believe technology is a huge part of that. But
Hmm.
I see so many people who desperately crave that freedom of being able to be an entrepreneur, although a lot of people think you can do whatever you want and you make your own schedule. Of course, a lot of that is fallacious, but they don't have the security in themselves to try it, to
Yeah.
do it, to bet on themselves. And I think what you said, you got to look in the mirror and say, you know what? Do I respect myself enough? Do I love myself enough? And that sounds ridiculous, but I don't believe that you can really love anybody else if you do unto others as you would like done unto yourself. I mean, that's a biblical passage. The very base of that is do unto others as you would like done unto yourself.
Yeah. You got
So
to
if you
want
don't
good for
believe,
yourself. Yeah.
yeah, if you don't believe you would pay for it,
Hmm.
you're never going to believe anybody will. But that's okay if you identify. I mean, it's not okay in the sense that we're talking about it, but a lot of times I'm going to pay for something that you might think is ridiculous to pay for, but it's because of your skill set you can provide for yourself, but I can't, and then vice versa.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
When
it's
it
funny
comes to
because those,
Fiverr,
yeah, sorry, just the moments of self doubt where you have the imposter syndrome. What is it that you're doing in those moments? You're literally just not believing in yourself, right? You just don't think you're that good anymore. So you just like, need another minute to go like, oh, I am good. And that little bit of I am good comes from like anything. It comes from like one more job coming in, or like just being able to pay yourself or something. You're like, oh, sweet, I am pretty good at this. Holy crap, look at this paycheck. This was from me doing
well,
stuff.
yes, that you hit a huge point. You have to relish the small things, especially when you're new, because that is how you survive and give yourself the confidence to get to the next level and the next level and the next
Hmm.
level. And for me, I've been through many businesses, some very successful, some failures, wild failures, and lots of failures within successful organizations or businesses that I started. And I could never understand early on when people talked about, I trust my gut or I've honed my gut. And
Hmm.
now I've gotten to the point where I almost can't understand not having a gut to rely upon,
Hmm.
but it's only honed by
Yep.
taking risks on yourself, on other people, making mistakes, realizing that didn't work. And that's how, when you talk about Mark Cuban or any Warren Buffett, any of those people that talk about my instincts, my gut, that just didn't happen overnight. That
Yep.
was a
That comes with
belief
time.
in yourself.
Yep.
Exactly. And it comes with time. And I think for an industry that you're in, which is really personal, because in every single product you deliver, there is a piece of James
Hmm.
out there. And that's a very it's I've often heard people talk about modeling. Like, if you can't take the heat, that might not be an industry you want to be in, because
Hmm.
you have people commenting about your face, about your arms, about all these different things, and
That's
you're
right.
kind of in an industry like that. So if you gotta develop a
Oh
thick
yeah.
skin.
Yeah, it can really, really stink sometimes. Like if somebody comes back and they don't like what you delivered, right? And it's not like sometimes it comes from a place of just like, hey, this word was wrong or whatever. No problem, right? That's not a personal thing, right?
Yep.
But if they come back with like, hey, we didn't like your tone. We need this to be more conversational, and they've already asked for that, and you already tried to deliver it, and it just wasn't up to their standard or it wasn't what they wanted. Still,
Yeah.
then it's like, am I any good at this? Right? Like
Yeah.
that moment can definitely kind of sneak in. So yeah, you're definitely right there.
Well, and I think it's important for us to have these conversations. And again, it's the root of the podcast is no one wants to talk about self doubt. Every single entrepreneur that's ever been successful, and even I don't care how successful you are, if you don't have some level of self doubt every once in a while, well, then you're either, as you described, so over abundantly arrogant and egotistical that that's not going to end up well at
Hmm.
the however it turns out, or you're simply human, and that's part of the process. For the second part of kind of what we've been talking about, a lot of people believe, oh, okay, it's the 21st century. I can just go on YouTube and I'll post a video and then I'm going to get wildly successful overnight.
Yeah.
Tell us about, because you've obviously experienced this, what mindset someone who actually believes they're going to, or someone who wants to be successful, but what should their expectations be, and where they need to set their minds so that they can endure the test of time and actually get to a point where they can be successful, such as you are?
Man, the consistency thing is definitely like the number one thing there. And the ability to consistently learn too. So like you're always looking for more pieces of information. Luckily, like I was really fired up about the voiceover thing when it started kind of working a little bit, even just a little tiny bit. It was like, okay, now I need to go learn a bunch of stuff, right? So I'll soak in as much information as I can, go look at, YouTube, go check out other people's profiles, see what they're doing, see what I can emulate, where I'm gonna fit. So if you're fired up, you're going to do a lot of that. But like the consistency thing is so key. I mean, if you talk about anything online, you're not going to get hit right away, right? You're going to have to push through quite a lot of obscurity. Still, I'm entirely obscure, right? Like, luckily, it doesn't matter because there's so much work in the world that like I can be obscure and still do totally okay.
Yeah.
But you know, imagine if people knew who I was and big companies were coming to me, right? Like not people that I've worked with before or word of mouth or anything like that, but just like you were just known, right? That takes a long time to
Yep.
get there, right? It takes a long, long time to get there unless essentially get pretty lucky. But that luck comes from consistency as well, right? So like you're not going to necessarily hit it on the first time, second time, 10th time, 20th time, 100th time, right? Mr. Beast talked about that a lot, as far as like just you have to keep making stuff.
Yep.
Make stuff, because you're going to get better at it over time. The voiceover thing for sure, right? Like I've done probably 5,000 voiceovers now. I've done this for, I think, 3.5 years or so now. And so
Wow.
that's a lot of voiceover, right? Like that's a lot
Yeah, it
of
is.
that's a lot of stuff. And the breadth of different projects within that number is quite great, right? And so maybe the place that I started from, as far as what I could handle when somebody comes in with something new, was probably pretty low. Whereas now I'm much more confident that something comes in, I'll know right away, and I've probably done 10 other projects that were similar. And so that stuff comes with time. But I guess the main thing there is just that, yeah, consistency is going to be absolutely key. And the consistency thing is really hard because the burnout thing comes from literally putting in work and not having an output, right? So you
Yeah.
you put in the work and you've done the thing, you've learned, you figured it out, you thought you knew what would work, you put it out there, you put yourself out there, and it fizzles. And it fizzles, and you wait and you wait and you wait. And there's a certain point where the burnout will set in, and you have to manage to get over that again and again and again and keep putting yourself out there. So it's super, super hard. And anybody who believes that YouTube will be quick and easy, I hope you're right, but you're probably not.
They've never done it. They've never done it. And I think that's the thing in the 21st century is because anybody it's just a logical business. When the barriers to entry are low, the barriers to entry on Fiverr are very, very low.
Hmm.
The abundance of individuals doing it, the competition is much higher, which means it's going to take more time or a tremendous amount of marketing to really break through, as
Hmm.
opposed to an industry like an oil industry. The barrier to entries there are very, very, very high, very capital intensive, very
That's
regulated.
right.
So there's a lot fewer competitors, but once you make it there, okay, the odds of success, well, even there's still a lot of R&D costs, but you understand my point. So in this
Hmm.
particular situation, and what my fear is, and I want your perspective on this, how old is your daughter?
She's 4.
4. Okay. How
Yeah.
many, you have 2 kids?
Yep. A 4-year-old and a
Okay,
2-year-old.
so they haven't quite gotten there in the sense that when I look at a lot of the uh, teenagers and I look at their ability to stick to something and believe in themselves enough, or quite frankly, just have the work ethic to give themselves the opportunity to experience what a commitment to consistency feels like. I'm concerned that our technology
Hmm.
is creating such short wavelengths and networks that they they don't even really understand what it means to work at something for a year or 2 years with no output,
Hmm.
still believing and having confidence in yourself that this can work out. What do you see? And especially in the gig economy, which you are involved in, you must see that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's really insular in a way where like I'm not really looking at what other people are doing within the gig economy that much. I've just kind of like only
Yeah.
seen like my own trajectory, I guess. And like luckily for me, like it was pretty linear for quite some time where like um I didn't really have to suffer all that long. I've suffered a lot more with YouTube. Um I've tried that since about 2010 on many different channels, and they've always been failures. Right? It is really really hard to break in there.
Yeah, it
And
is.
finally, I had a little bit of success just over the previous year with two different channels that started kind of working a little bit. But in both of
And
those
what were you
cases,
focused on?
do you mean like the niches or the like?
Y-
Yeah, okay. One of
Yeah,
them
the
was for
niches.
voiceover. One of them was just creating
Okay.
a YouTube channel about what I'm doing with my work, and another one was just gaming stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, luckily it hit a viral one that got a couple million views, and then it like got some subs and kind of got some traction. The voiceover one is actually surprisingly with a lower sub count, more engaged, more interested, more of a community, which is interesting, right? Because that shows that people who have a niche where they actually care a lot more about what they're kind of looking at, they're going to talk more, they're going to be more interested. The gaming people, they'll come, they'll have a look, and then they're off to 100 other videos that are within their niche, right? So
Yeah.
um,
That's
that's
a
an
great
interesting point.
point. I mean, niches get riches. So for you, YouTube, even though, and for people, when he says subs, he's talking about subscribers. That's short for subscribers on YouTube, which is really what the YouTube game is about. Oh, it's really about views,
Has
but the
been,
more
yeah,
subscribers
yeah.
you have, yeah,
It used to
theoretically,
be, yeah,
you
it
should
used to
have.
be subs. Now it's more about views, and yeah, a lot of
Exactly.
different
Yep.
metrics.
But on the one where it's more directed, the voiceover, you're getting a little bit more traction. And the gaming, my nephews are, they'll sit there and they'll watch Minecraft videos for ad nauseum, and I'm just like, but those people bounce along. But to your point, if you are consistent enough, I believe you can break through into any community. It's just how long are you willing and able to endure putting a tremendous amount of input, because a lot of people think you just put up a video and it works. No, it's a lot of work doing
Hmm.
post production and getting good video, etc. But how long are you willing to put in the input, and give yourself before you
and
actually get
and
an
and
output?
actively, right? Because like if you say you like set yourself on a course where you're just like, cool, I'm going to upload a TikTok once every day all year, right? And it's going to be the exact same thing. I'm going to look at whatever trend is going on today, I'm going to do the trend, right? Maybe that just never works, right? So like
Yeah.
you you don't have like sort of like nothing is owed to you, right? You don't get to go like I'm just going to put up a TikTok and eventually I'll get a following. It's like, are you interesting? Do people want to watch you? Right? So like, consistency is great, but consistency of like effort, right? Where you're like actually going like, okay, what's working? What can I change? What can I do differently? Right? Like what is missing? Like how can I fit in here? Um, you know, what am I lacking? How can I become better? Right? Am I funny enough? Do I need to go take improv classes? Like what do I need to do? Like it's like it's not just consistency of like I have checked off my box for the day, right? I've put up my video. It's like consistency of like I've actually done everything that I needed today to like further myself in this thing that I'm working on, right? Like that's so much harder.
Well, it's a whole different mindset, because to your point, everybody believes you can just put something on YouTube or put something anywhere, TikTok, and then you're just automatically going to become successful. And I think one of the things that you just said, very well put, nothing is owed to you.
Hmm.
You have to scrape, you have to work, you have to be consistent, you have to be passionate about every single thing you do if you want to accomplish, especially in the gig economy when the barriers to entry, like we just talked about, are so low. Millions of people are trying to do it. So if you
Hmm.
think you're just going to tick that box, and as you said, you have to be actively consistent every day. If you think you're going to tick that box, you're not actively consistent, and you're going to get a following, you're going to learn the hard way. And I think that that's why I was so fascinated. I've not had an entrepreneur has been as successful in the gig economy as you have. And I think that is the number one, I don't have any statistics, but the place most people will go to or will try, because it is so easy to do. But
Hmm.
what they don't realize is that if you're going to be successful, it's one of the hardest things you can do because there are so many people out there trying to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the difficulty there too is like it creates like a bad vibe on the entire platform sometimes, right? Because the barrier to entry can be so low that there's people who are like scamming, straight up selling things that they're not able to
Yeah.
do. And so like your quality can be so much higher than everybody else around you, right? Because of the fact that there are a lot of like bad apples, but you still got to get found amongst the bad apples. So that's going to be like the absolute trick is how you put yourself out there in a way that you actually get found. And luckily, on most of these sites, they have a lot of options where you can interact with their site quite a lot as far as creating, SEO, descriptions and stuff that actually work, and also, creating yourself some kind of an intro video where you actually introduce yourself and show people that you're a real person who's actually going to work on their projects. That's going to set you apart from like at least 70%, if not more, of the people on those platforms. If you just use every single thing that they give you to use, because if you just go on and make like a description and you don't even like do anything with like your graphics or whatever. You're just like, yeah, I'm just a guy, and you're not going to really get anywhere. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. For you, what did you find to be the most successful in your journey in terms of that being sought out or being found? In this case, on Fiverr, what words of advice if someone's listening? They're like, I really like what James said. I have a skill, or I believe I have a skill.
mhm.
I'm going to go to Fiverr, see if someone will pay me for that skill. What things did you focus on? And I'm sure it was a trial and error type of situation, but what things did you find to be the most effective for what you did or what
low
you're doing?
low price, as high quality as you possibly can get. Ask for a review every single time. Get your review base going, and then once you have that, increase your quality as quickly as possible. So for me, that meant building a sound booth, which was a huge learning curve. I don't know anything about construction. I had my father-in-law come in and help me build essentially a shed that I could put in my house, right? And so
That's
I still have
awesome.
that now. I'm just going to turn my camera. I don't know if this will be visible or not, but my sound booth is just next to me in my office here. So, when I was creating a
Yeah.
tent, for myself using moving blankets, that was a dream, right? Like someday I'll be able to open a door and walk into a sound booth, right? That'd be incredible. So yeah, you want to up your quality as quickly as possible. Once your quality is increased, then what will happen, because your quality is so high and your price is so low, if you have any traction at all from the algorithm, then what's going to happen is you're going to start getting flooded with orders because your quality is high, your pricing is low. Then you start trying to find the equilibrium, right? For me, that meant just
Yeah.
doubling my prices, and bringing my word count down until I found something that kind of worked in the middle. Um, but yeah, you're gonna have to,
Th-
like you said, you're gonna have to scrape. You're gonna have to figure out every little thing you can do on the platforms to give yourself an edge. And then the last little piece of the puzzle that I want to add here is something that you said earlier. You said people love the idea that if you work for yourself and you do this maybe even online, that you can create your own schedule and it's all hunky dory. I did not take a single day off of voiceover for over 2 years. And then I took one weekend and then I went right back to work, and I haven't taken any other time off ever since. So yeah, it's flexible, which is great. Like I don't have to work every second. I don't have to clock in and clock out, obviously, right?
Yep.
Awesome. I'm not complaining. There's no world where I'm complaining about this, but you are living it, right? Every morning, the first thing I do is check to see what's going on, right? Then I plan my day around it. Okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Okay, cool. Sometimes you're staying up super late all night trying to get stuff done, right? So like that's your life now, right? Like so yeah, it's all that stuff plus consistency, right?
Well, and I'm so appreciative that you shared that with us because, again, anybody wanting to do something like this, really listen to what James just said and ask yourself, do you have the mustard to
Oh,
or the
sorry.
muster to actually go through? Because it isn't, a lot of people, if you're working a 9 to 5 job or the corporate world, okay, you got your personal life, you got your professional life, there are very distinct boundaries of what those are. When you are an entrepreneur, those boundaries disappear,
Yeah, they
and
go
I
away.
don't care what, they go away. And for a lot of people, that is such an earth shattering adjustment because it is entirely a lifestyle change. I can't think of the last weekend that I haven't worked. Even when I'm on vacation, I've got my computer, and I've
Yep.
got to be ready at the willing to
hmm
do whatever it is that I respond to customers or deal with this headache. It doesn't matter where you are. And for some people, that's such a lifestyle change that they're not
Yeah,
aware of. And so
and
I think,
that's fine. I've often said that too.
yeah,
Like if you are more comfortable in that other world of just having a salary, having a benefits plan, and knowing your hours, that's awesome. Like that's actually really awesome. Do that.
it's we need a world that has people of all sorts and people that are, that is how, what motivates them.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. No, and that's why
But
like the sort of shaming around it is just terrible. Like like do what works for you, right? Like this isn't for everybody by any means.
That's that's exactly right. And what I most want to focus on is people who are born to be entrepreneurs, but they never believe in themselves enough or take that risk to realize or find out that they are entrepreneurs. And I
hmm
think you are a perfect example of, there just can't be any excuses. In the 21st century, it is so easy, I put that in quotes,
Accessible.
but the accessible, that's a great word. It is so accessible to try. And if you have the passion and you have the work ethic and you have the commitment to consistency and you're willing to be flexible and you're willing to adapt as required in any small business, you can be successful in the gig economy just like you have done.
hmm
Now, I want to ask, what's next for you? So, obviously, I think anybody, any entrepreneur, when they find some level of success and then they get to find that equilibrium between the quality of your work and the price that should be paid for it, you want to grow. So,
hmm
in the gig economy, how do you grow? What are you thinking about?
So there's a couple different options for sure, and it's stuff that like I've thought about a long time ago, even within this space. The first is I built myself a pretty decent home studio now for audio recording.
Hmm.
So the first thing I can do with this is just bring people in physically, IRL, right? Anybody wants to do kind
Yep.
of audio work stuff, you need a space to do it. This is it, right? So that's one avenue. The other avenue is going, and that's not a very scalable avenue. That's an avenue
Hmm.
that is, also you're bringing people into what is my home, right? So it's like, there's a lot of issues there, right? And
Yeah.
then the other side of it is all online, which is find more talent and bring them into the fold, right? So people who already have the talent and already have equipment, but don't have the traction yet, I have a established platform. Fiverr allows sort of agency work, so you can start creating yourself essentially an agency. Um, there's training as well. So the YouTube thing goes down that road. You build yourself a community, start going down the training road, where you can create, one-on-ones. You can help people with whether. I never answered your question earlier. I never did vocal work. I just figured it out on my own. But if other people feel that they do need some vocal training, or if they if they want help with the business side, then you can start doing the training thing. So there's all those sort of adjacent businesses within the voiceover freelance world, and then there's other stuff outside of it as well. Because once you start seeing things sort of in an entrepreneurial way, I'm sure and everybody else who's listening kind of knows that you start seeing other stuff that way as well. We're guilty
Yep.
of seeing even our family life that way now too. Like we kind of run our family like a business sometimes.
It's almost inevitable. Once you become an entrepreneur, it just kind of, it's so logical, right?
It snowballs out.
So,
Yep.
yeah, it snowballs out. But I love how you just described the growth opportunity. So if you want to be successful in the gig economy and you hit a niche, there are so many opportunities for people to expand other than just bringing in more
You
clients
can
and
only do
upping.
so much, right? Like
Exactly.
once your
You're
time is used up, as long as you're still creating bespoke products, like I have to work on every single one of these, right? So it's not
yes.
something where I can just infinitely scale. It's not a product that I can just infinitely scale. So there you have to find something else that you can do that just doesn't use up more of your time, right?
And that's exactly right. The only way for you to scale, we all have 20, every man, every woman, every child has 24 hours in a day, and it's never going to change. And so when you're in an industry like that, where it's dependent upon your skills and your time, there are other ways to scale, as you just described. You have to think outside of yourself, whether it's an agency or whether it's creating recurring revenue opportunity through videos, training videos that people will pay for into perpetuity, and you get a residual stream from that. I mean, so there are so many ways in what you're doing once you have found success to expand on that
Mm-hmm.
and increase your revenue base and grow.
Yep. Absolutely.
James, you have been incredibly gracious with your time, and I want to offer you the opportunity. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be particularly important for all of our listeners, whether it's advice on how to be successful as an entrepreneur or personal, professional, anything that you think is particularly important that you want to share with our audience?
I'll fold, like, honestly, it's been a great talk. Thanks, Andrew. It's been awesome coming on. It's cool sometimes when you talk about this stuff that, like, stuff comes out of you. You're talking about something that you didn't even know that you knew, right? You're like, oh, wow. Cause like the one insight that I think, if anything, that I pulled from this conversation is there's the delusional self-confidence thing, but there's also just the idea of like liking yourself being the thing that allows you to be entrepreneurial. I never thought of that before. And I'm incredibly fortunate. I didn't create that situation for myself. I always just think like, wow, it's incredible that I'm not depressed. I love that about myself. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that, right? Because you don't have a choice, right? Like you
Yeah.
either, and so you can make the right choices to move down that road, figure out things that make you feel more like the person you want to be. But wow, what an incredible piece of insight that you actually have to like yourself before you can be successful. You might fall into some amount of success while still being miserable and hating yourself, but it's probably not very likely, and it probably isn't very sustainable. So probably work on yourself and be happy.
I think that's excellent advice. And as I said, when you made that point, I've never even really thought about it in that way. But if you boil everything down, that's exactly right. You cannot help other people until you understand that you can help yourself and love yourself. And that's how you're going to be able to offer your services and help other people as well.
For sure.
James, thank you so much for your time. You have given us a lot of excellent information and advice that I will certainly be able to utilize and learn from in this podcast. I started this year and we're going on episode 39 or 40, I don't remember. And it is hard to
Oh,
do
yeah.
this consistently every week when, the revenue model here is it might never come or it won't come for, 100 or 150 episodes, but it's down to being passionate about what you're doing, increasing your quality, and then just having fun and having good conversations like these.
Absolutely. This was
And
a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
yeah, thanks so much, James.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.
That was a lot of fun having James join us, especially because he's been so successful in what we call the gig economy. And if you aren't certain how to get started or how to take a step in that direction of becoming self sufficient, becoming an entrepreneur, there isn't an opportunity with a lower barrier and lower risk than something like that. So listen to the podcast again. Think about what he said, maybe take notes. And I'm confident that if you have the passion and you have the skill set that you believe someone else will pay you for, they likely will. That's all the time that we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Follow and interact with me on Twitter. My handle is A Holland Podcast and Threads, of course. And lastly, subscribe to the show on your favorite audio platform. And like I've always said, we only grow when you interact with me and you share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. So if you learn something new or a piece of advice you found interesting, please share it with others so they can hear the same thing and they might find something different, interesting as well. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.